Hi, welcome to Behind the Work. I'm Elizabeth Paul, the Chief Brand Officer at Martin, and I have with me today Katie Samuelsen and Drew Butler to talk about the magical and maniacal work for Cinnamon Toast Crunch and our friends at General Mills. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for having us.
Brave of you. Okay, so to start, let's talk about who eats cereal broadly. So I'm a mom of 3 teenagers, or like 2 teenagers and a tween, and I read somewhere that the largest cohort of cereal eaters are kids and teenagers. But usually what kids like teenagers are just like allergic to. So who is eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch when you guys got the brief?
Well, when we got the brief, it was all about how teens and kids are eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch, but teens have more power over what their parents are buying. They have more influence of telling their parents what they want and what they want them to buy. So the brief was to reorient Cinnamon Toast Crunch for teenagers because of that like power that they have over what their parents are buying.
All right, so the task is kind of to age up the brand and to reignite relevance for Cinnamon Toast Crunch with teenagers specifically.
Exactly.
Obviously, we all know our favorite Steve Buscemi "Hello, Fellow Kids" meme.
Yeah.
Starting to appeal to teenagers when one has not been appealing to teenagers for a while is kind of a delicate dance. How did you guys approach that? Like, what seemed smart versus cringe? Like, what was the early exploration like?
I think from the beginning with this brand, we were always really interested in the sort of cannibalism storyline that had been happening from the beginning. I mean, if you look at the old spots from the 2000s, the cereal they're eating each other, but they're doing it in this really cheerful way. And we've always, when we were asked to be on this brand, we were like, okay, well, are they open to keep doing cannibalism? Because there's such a darkness.
Did you remember that?
Yes.
Because when I first heard that, like, kind of deep in the annals of the brand history, there was some, like, cheerful eating of one's peers. I did not remember that. I'm trying to figure out if it went over my head.
Well, it was Chef Wendell in the 80s and 90s, and then it switched over to the cereal eating itself in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And then it kind of got into the Cinemoji category where it was like very poppy, very like, tween. And so we wanted to like hold on to that equity of the cereal eating itself, but just kind of like look it in the eye, look it on the nose, and take it to the darkest possible conclusion.
Because that's a dark idea, but it had not been executed in a dark way.
Exactly. It was very poppy, very cheerful, very like, silly tongues licking their mouths and
blink
burping.
And you missed it.
Totally. And that was the commercials when we were kids, so we were just like, let's keep doing this, but let's look at it for what it is, which is pretty dark.
Yeah.
Well, and these days, the things that, particularly like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, being children of the internet, if you will, the taste for content is like darker and more absurdist and so on and so forth. So how much did that either guide the idea or help you kind of figure out like the right tone with which to execute?
Massively. I think our strategist helped us point out stuff that teens are really into. They're really into true crime. They're really into horror. So I think we didn't really look at the category as competition. We more so looked at like their feed as competition and trying to be like, how can we be better than the horror that they're into? How can we be more comedic than the comedy that they're into, and kind of marry those two together?
Yeah, I remember when she's now 17, but maybe like 11 or 12 at the time, her and all of her friends got into this like Lovecraftian podcast series called the Magnus Archives, which is like very dark and twisty, and being like, what are you listening to?
Yeah.
But it is definitely kind of like definitional, like for that taste.
Yeah, and it's like you think Slender Man, you think like all of the backroom stuff that's really big, like the YouTube indie horror creators. All of that is like the stuff that they're like watching and listening to, and so it's nice to make work that doesn't like give teens like kid gloves.
Actually.
Yeah, I think for a legacy cereal brand to be taking cues from like horror and true crime and spaces like that, in some ways I think that's why the work was so breakthrough, because it was genuinely surprising that a brand like that would kind of go into those like realms of pop culture. But I'm sure that also created some nervousness. Like one of the things I love about this is I think often, I always think about the quote, "The fear is the death of creativity." And right now so much of the industry is defined like by a lot of nervousness and fear, and there can be a lot of fear to get it wrong, maybe even more so than there is like ambition to get it right. And you guys had to like walk such a great line, I think, to land in that space.
Totally. Well, I just think it's the like Martin thing of fighting invisibility. It's like you can do something that's really safe and it's going to be invisible, or you can do something that's a little, scary, but it's like I think other people feel that you're taking that risk and they're into it because of that.
Yeah, I think nerves can be really good too. Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing if something makes you nervous. I think you can kind of be starting to go into the deep end where you're not totally comfortable, and that makes you feel a little nervous, but something really interesting and cool can be happening there at the same time. So I think it's about like trusting the team that you're with and trusting the work that, it'll shine and you'll get a good response out of it.
So you guys had, a distinctive brand asset or an artifact in the brand's history, and these like squares that were so delicious they ate themselves.
Yes.
Great little product benefit in there. You had a lot of audience intelligence on like what teens were actually looking at, and consuming. How did that translate into the actual like the story and the execution? It seems like you had the idea itself pretty early, but how did you get to the execution from there?
I would say that I think we kind of wanted to figure out, okay, how do you tell that story, that same little story of them eating each other, and then how do you do it in the same kind of like noir horror element of like whatever it is that the teens are looking at. So we kind of like viewed these stories, okay, what's kind of the true crime lens, and like how does this actually work when you see it kind of play out. And so I think from there we were kind of figuring out like, okay, it starts out with a square hungering after other squares, and that's always got to be kind of the tension in there of like one is trying to eat the other, or trying to evade being eaten, something like that, and then eventually it'll end up with consuming Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And then from in there you can have all of these fun little kind of emotional nuances of like what's going on in the head of the person or the square trying to eat the other squares, and then from there you can kind of like build out this whole narrative and world about who the squares are and what it's like for them to exist in this space.
So in some ways the story, you had the product proposition is like clear, like so delicious it's irresistible, must Cinnadust. You had the brand artifact, but it sounds like you actually let genre itself guide some of the stories. Like we talked about horror, you talked about noir, you talked about film like true crime. It's interesting to think about like picking a genre, particularly a surprising genre, and then letting the not tropes but the truths of that type of genre actually guide a clean story and the work itself.
Totally. Well, I think at the end of the day, like it is comedy, but it's just using horror as a avenue to create comedy. There's such a tension between like, the inner mind of a cannibal and then, but that cannibal is a piece of cereal. It's so absurd that I think like the horror tension creates the like seriousness under which the comedy can thrive.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about actually like kind of the world that you built for a minute. So one of the things I love about this is the craft is so core to the idea itself. Like it would have been very easy to do this with computer animation, with AI. Instead, you partnered with some of the best puppeteers, puppet masters, puppet men, I don't really know what to call them, who had worked on, the Fantastic Mr. Fox and Wallace and Gromit. Like you pulled in craftspeople who knew a little bit about world building. Tell me about that part of the process.
Yeah, so I think right off the bat, we were looking at different ways to approach this, and we really gravitated towards stop motion because, again, it's such a kind of like long established medium that has such like renowned pieces of work that have come out of it, like the ones that you just named. And also, I think we were really drawn to the realistic tactile feel of it, and especially when you're trying to highlight the product benefit, of how crispy the squares look, how sparkly the Cinnadust is on it. Something that was real and authentic and kind of like live in camera felt like the right way to go. And then especially when you work with these people who are just very, very true artists, you kind of get to see the emotion that they're able to imbue into these characters. And it's funny when you hear them talk about it because they are puppets, even though they're just squares. So it's a very unusual puppet, but the way that they think about kind of communicating a feeling or a thought just by the way the puppet's moving, or kind of like how much are they leaning when they walk and things like that. It's like these people have a capacity to tell an emotion that you might not be able to get through other mediums. And so we really wanted to dive into the craft that way.
Yeah, you can't like prompt the specificity of like when the
Yes.
square leans this way, he's kind of, you can feel that he's remorseful because his eyelids are drooping down. Like it's just such a human thing, and I think like it just furthered the comedy even more to have
Yeah.
such a human perspective imbued into these like silly, dumb cereal squares.
Sparkly.
Yeah,
delicious
Yes.
squares,
totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, my when I saw the like behind the scenes footage, it was amazing. My two favorite moments. One is where he stabs the other one with the spoon, and in the behind the scenes, you can see the thing breaking apart. How big were they in real life?
About like this big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how big was like the total like set on which you? You're talking
The
like a
Size of the
dollhouse?
couch, I would
Yeah,
say.
I think
okay.
the alleyway was probably about the size of the couch, maybe a little bit further, and then the fridge set, I would say, is maybe it was built up around maybe like a 3 foot by 3 foot board.
All right, the fridge was my other one, where he opens the
Yeah,
and you got
yeah,
the jars
yeah.
with the eyeballs.
Yes,
and stuff.
yes.
Like it was completely
Yes,
unhinged.
it was crazy. Yeah, we had hours of debate around
Yes.
where to put each little piece in the
Yeah,
fridge.
yeah. Very,
so
very
fun.
thought through.
Yeah, and I
for
think
sure.
additionally one really interesting thing about the sets, the fridge set was built on the scale between the fridge set and the alley set were different. The alley set was a little bit larger than life, so it felt like the cereal pieces were like small in comparison to the big building. But the fridge set was built on a smaller scale than usual, so it was like quite difficult for the animators to get in there. But that was like another really intentional choice to make it seem really like claustrophobic and foreboding and like give more information about this character and like the lifestyle that he's choosing to have.
The one for me more than anything were like the little pieces in the jars in the fridge, where I was like, oh, they really went there.
Yeah.
Totally. There's Easter eggs all over. I think also
Yeah.
in the fridge, there's a milk carton with a little like missing sign for Chef Wendell, who's like the old chef who hasn't been seen since the early 90s.
yeah.
So where's he? We don't know. Maybe he'll come back.
All right, tell me about some of the other Easter eggs.
There's a little kind of like knife rack on the wall, but instead of knives, it's different sizes of spoons. The chair that the square is eating off of in fridge is made from a bottle cap opener. And we also have just tons of little things throughout the alleyway set as well. Like all of the kind of like skyline in the buildings are all made from different, scaled up, larger than life, just like kitchen appliances and pantry items and things like that.
All right, speaking of Easter eggs,
Yes.
tell me about the cookbooks.
Okay, in the part of the spot where he's walking from the table to the fridge, if you pause it, behind him you can see there's all these little cookbooks that have these murderous titles. There's Breakfast to Die For, there's Cooking with Friends, there's Killer Recipes. We had like a blast writing all of these, and there were so many that
I love
didn't
it.
make it to the end one.
All right, so I confess the first time I saw this work, I missed all of the Easter eggs. Like, I did not notice any of those fun things. And actually, the way I figured it out was in the wild. I was taking a walk around the neighborhood with my 13-year-old, who did not know that Martin had Cinnamon Toast Crunch or had worked on it, and he was telling me all about the campaign. And he's like, these cereals are so delicious. They're eating the other cereals. And he is the one who pointed out like some of the Easter eggs. And I asked him, I was like, do you know that we worked on that? And he did not. And I asked him where he had seen it, because honestly, I wasn't 100% sure. We don't have a ton of TV at our house. And he said all of his friends were talking about it. And so I
awesome.
recognize
That's
that
great.
13 is like on the younger end of like the teenage spectrum. But it seems like tweens and teens actually really leaned in to the Easter egg. Like it seems like this genuinely kind of got into teen culture. So tell me a little bit about that piece. Like these odd characters seem like they are made for kind of mixing and remixing and memeing and gifing. How did that part take off?
I mean, that was intentional. I think it was just about the thing we were saying earlier about like the competition is the feed, and so trying to make something that is as good as all the memeable stuff in their feed.
So were you thinking about it even like frame by frame? Like when you had the stabbing with the spoon, or you had the things, were you guys engineering them to be remixed, or you just kind of had a hunch that if the visuals were interesting enough, they'd end up there?
I think it was a bit of a happy accident in some ways, in the sense of, we're always excited to see how people take the work and remix it and make it their own, and which parts of the work appeal to different people. I think the way that we approached it was to fill the spot with as many different things as we can, in the hopes of people going back and rewatching and finding something new about the character that they want. want. I think as we go forward into the next evolution of the campaign, it's about, kind of like tailoring that a little more and being a little more precise and kind of trying to preempt some of the things that people might be responding and reacting to, while obviously, continuing to further the story and the brand message.
It's also such a good reminder that when you make advertising that feels like advertising, people avoid it. But when you make advertising that feels like entertainment, not only will they watch it and in some cases rewatch it, but they will recut it and they will make it their own. I believe there was a TikToker who just got really, really into this. Tell me about that guy.
Yes, shout out to rumbucks.aep. He re-edited and remixed our spots, and they blew up. They got like millions of views, like hundreds of thousands of comments, if I'm correct. It just went really big, and a lot of people were seeing it in a way that I think was even bigger than we expected, and like probably even bigger than like a media buy could have intentionally put on the map.
So it occurs to me there's also behind you kind of like the conspiracy theory that predated the campaign. I think there's something interesting about the fact that this like started in internet true crime culture and then ended up with a content creator kind of taking it and really becoming like a media channel unto himself. How did you guys seed this before the work ever broke?
That's a great question. I think they kind of came out concurrently.
Yeah,
I want to say.
I mean, I'll say there's like lots of videos online that people have made through the years. There's like a 10-minute video that someone made that's like, where's Chef Wendell? What happened to Chef Wendell? There's all of these like things online. People are like on Reddit talking about the lore of these characters, and it's like if they're eating each other, like where do they go? What's going on? And so it's been really thrilling to like build out the lore and like build out the truth of this brand based on how people are talking about it online.
And you worked with content creators who are true crime creators or have platforms. What did that engagement look like?
Yes, so we sent true crime creators boxes of cereal that only had one square inside, because the logical thing, they've eaten themselves, there's only one square left. We sent them that, and then we sent them some like evidence, and we had them open the box, sort it out, and kind of come to their own conclusions about what must have happened, just to kind of further the lore of this like serial cannibalism and this what's going on at General Mills kind of idea.
And these are some of the...
This is the evidence.
Yeah, we have, CCTV photos of serial incidents, kind of leaked emails. There's also, there was a audio file in there of a, recording of the serial going crazy on the production floor and someone asking their manager what they do about it. So there's all these little kind of tidbits that, again, if you dive into each one of them, will reveal a bigger part of the story.
Do you have to recreate them every time you make more work?
We have a bunch of them on set. I think the way that, not to get too technical, but the way that the puppets themselves work is that whenever their faces change, it's just a little faceplate that comes off, and part of the finishing process is like smoothing out the lines around it. So if you see the kind of unfinished version of the spots, they'll have the little outlines of the faces. So any kind of eyeball change or expression change, you just kind of pop off a face and put on another face on. So there's a box of like 40 different faceplates that go through the cycle of emotions that the square needs for that particular moment. So I think we really like the square design. Obviously, people watching it love it too. And so I think any kind of new development will be for potentially a new character, or also just kind of whatever the facial expressions are that we need for that particular story that we're trying to tell.
Yeah, and one thing in the last round, the way we differentiated between characters, they have like slightly different stripes, and then the ones that are, the hungrier ones versus the ones that are about to get eaten, they have a different size of pupil. So there's just so many, such a focus and such a detail, such a high level of detail that went into all of this.
Well, to your point earlier, like they're designed to stop your thumb, you know, and we often talk about the fact that 84% of ads aren't seen or remembered, and I think, AI is infiltrating in good ways, in challenging ways, so many of the ways that we work, that we get to work, et cetera. But there is something really powerful about something that looks like nothing else, feels like a world you maybe recognize but haven't been in before, that makes you want to like stop and spend more time there. So I think the craft investment on this one really, really paid off.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and the benefit of AI, where you're able to make something really fast and kind of put it out at a lower cost than potentially more traditional mediums, that can be helpful. I think also it's figuring out kind of like how do we do that in a way that doesn't kind of get the audience used to seeing that kind of thing and used to treating content as something that is really disposable and that you see it once and you throw it away and never think about it again. And so having that kind of craft investment where you're able to see something that makes you want to go back and look at it again and kind of dig into all of the real tactile elements of the kind of piece of content or whatever it is that you're looking at, I think is a way to make a real connection with people.
So you've seeded, created, and are now extending an entertainment world that teenagers wanted to spend time with. If I remember correctly, there were like 44 million views that were driven specifically by teenagers. And I think like, almost a 2,000% lift in TikTok searches for Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Did you know when you made it that it was going to blow up like that? Or was some of that just this thing catching fire and running on its own?
We always knew, we were planning on those exact numbers for sure.
Yeah, we were hoping for 45.
Yeah.
No,
I think we were really
true.
hopeful that it was going to be well received, and I think those numbers are just a great testament to all of the kind of thoughtfulness and the craft that went into it. And I think, again, to your point earlier about making work that feels more like entertainment than, an ad forward message, I think really lends itself well to that kind of organic interest.
Yeah, if you're scrolling through 10 pieces of like AI slob banana wedding whatever, and then you come across this like beautifully handcrafted, the Cinnadust is sparkling, you're gonna stop and you're gonna want to see it because it's different and it's eye-catching.
Yeah, we often say cultural impact can't be guaranteed, but it can be engineered. And I think about the fact that like you can load the die with so many things, and then at the end of the day the internet decides. But the more craft and interest and entertainment and tension and subculture and seeding you can put into the work, like the better the odds are that it's going to have lift when you put it out into the world. And I feel like I see all the fingerprints of that here.
And it's just thrilling to make. It's so fun to get so in the weeds of this world and figure out like the psyche of these characters and like what they're going through and what they're thinking and what they're feeling and why they do what they do and like what their apartments look like. It's just like so fun to build out all these details, and it was like so special to get to work on a project that let us build and create in that way.
My understanding is that not only did this drive like incredible interest among teenagers, it actually did lift sales. So what happened in the business after the work came out?
We had a 0.15% lift, I believe, in products sold, which doesn't sound like a lot, but overall in a broad category sense is a really, really big lift. So I think we reversed some of the sales decline that they had been experiencing.
My understanding is that like the whole center of the store is really, really challenged at grocery stores right now. People are shopping the perimeter of the store. They're not buying as many packaged goods. So it seems like the whole cereal category broadly was kind of challenged, and not only did you like kind of reverse them out of that, but actually were able to start sourcing growth with the audience that matters the most.
Totally.
Yep.
So we do this entertainment strategy workshop sometimes with brands where, we'll take a brand that's interested in doing more in the entertainment world and help them kind of better understand the landscape and where they want to play, whether that's like original content or, integration. And one of the things we sometimes talk about is genre, which heavily influenced this. The most natural places that most brands want to go to are the broadest and most mainstream. But those are also the most crowded in terms of where the most brands play. Horror is a really interesting one, and true crime similarly, because they have huge, rabid fandoms. They're some of the fastest growing genres, and yet brands don't always want to play there. But one of the things I have learned, like through these entertainment strategy workshops that we do, is that the relationship between horror and comedy is really, really close in a lot of cases. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this work is that while it has this kind of like noir, dark setting, it's really, really funny. So talk to me about like the dark comedy aspect of the world you've created.
Totally. Well, I think it's all about this really serious topic of these characters taste so delicious that they're eating themselves, kind of matched with the exact same absurdity of that topic, which is the cereal. We're talking about a cereal. Like, it's not so serious. And I think it is that, like, pairing of those two things and finding the balance between them of these, like, dark monologues of the characters, of them, like, thinking about the shame of their actions and reckoning with, like, is this who I am? Is this how I want to live? But then also the flip side of that is it's a delicious cereal, and it's not that serious. So I think we were always kind of keeping an eye on that lever of, like, not pushing it too far into horror, but not pushing it too far into comedy, and, like, taking itself seriously enough that it would land funny, because I think if it had been more slapstick or more silly, it like wouldn't have landed. But if we had gone scarier, I think it also wouldn't have landed.
Yeah.
So it's just moving that dial.
Yeah,
Is, you know,
yeah.
piece by piece through the stop motion process. It's quite tricky to like do, you know, you film it first and then you do the voice and then you do the music, layering all these parts onto each other and getting that dial in the right place was a really fun process and really specific and technical and nebulous.
We did a panel at Cannes with the New York Comedy Festival where we talked about humor in advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much research that shows that humor is wildly effective, audiences prefer it, and so on and so forth. And yet, fewer and fewer brands are using humor. And which is just like a fascinating disconnect. Like, as you know, you know that it works, you know that audiences prefer to see it, and yet it's being used less and less often. And we did a survey of global marketers where we asked them about their openness to using humor since it's not used very often. And I was actually surprised. The results were not what I thought. The results were very high of marketers who said they would consider using humor, which I actually was like, okay, maybe this was bad survey design. I was like, if 90-something% are like, I would totally use humor. Why is nobody using it? And then I got into the verbatims, and there was a question that was like, what would it have to be to make you use humor? And in the verbatims, I found the answer. The answer was often like, I would have to be guaranteed that everyone would find it funny.
Totally.
Which is just never true with real comedy.
Impossible.
And so there's so many categories that are broadly humor, but the work is not very funny.
Yeah.
And so often with briefs and with conversations with marketers, you'll hear like, well, I want smart humor. I don't want slapstick. I don't want this. I don't want that. Like, this is dark humor.
Yeah.
It's absurdist humor. It is positively odd, and yet it is legitimately laugh out loud funny. How did you find the right zone of humor, and how did you kind of get everybody on board? Humor is vulnerable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it's just knowing our target and knowing that, you know, our strategists had a lot of really good research about how teens are, you know, they're turning to true crime, they're turning to comedy, and especially this like very surreal online like internet comedy. They're turning to it as a way to like make sense of the more and more like fucked up and absurd. Can I cuss on this podcast?
Well, bleep it, if not.
They're turning to true crime and horror and comedy for the same reasons, which is to kind of make sense of how messed up the world is around them and how just like crazy things are. So I think leaning into that and leaning into the truth of that and again the things that they're interacting with.
All right, final thoughts. What happens next? I mean, I know you guys are going back to extend the world, but I mean, not to give away any spoilers for the future of the campaign, but where's your mind?
Our mind is in the sick minds of those serial cannibals.
Kind of continuing what we have and evolving it further while also giving these people who are, you know, getting really invested in the brand something new to look forward to.
Well, you guys have revived an iconic brand. And you have gotten my teenagers to all request Cinnamon Toast Crunch. So congratulations.
Let's go.
Thanks for talking to us
Thank you.
about work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.